in Matthew 26. So we have 2 more chapters after this, and we are well into Jesus' betrayal and on his way to the cross. And so we've already covered the ground that everybody's looking to kill him, that Judas is betraying him, that his friends are going to forsake him, and that they can't even stay awake in the garden while he's trying to pray. He's telling the disciples that he's going through some really human stuff. As the Son of God, he's both God, and fully human. That's something difficult to wrap our heads around, but this is a very human look at Jesus, where a lot of times he seems superhuman in a lot of ways, but he's just really upset and praying about this. So we're on to the betrayal. He says that the time has come and he's about to be betrayed, and that's when Judas shows up. So in verse 47, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man, seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched down his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be so?" At that hour Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples left him and fled. All the disciples left him and fled. After just an hour earlier saying, "Would never, even if it meant death, we wouldn't deny you." So I think it's interesting that Judas came, and it says one of the 12. At some point it doesn't say when Judas left, but he says, "Is it I, Rabbi?" And Jesus says, "Yes, you have said so." And somewhere between then and where we've got to Gethsemane, Judas has left. I wouldn't stick around if I had just been accused of betraying the leader of my group. He probably took off shortly after that. I don't know. It makes you wonder, was he there for the Lord's Supper? Or did he leave after? Here it says one of the 12. They're still including him as one of the 12 disciples. So they came with swords and clubs, and he betrays Jesus with a kiss. So a sign of friendship is what ultimately betrayed Jesus. And Jesus just responds, "Friend, do what you came to do." I think it's funny because Jesus says that, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, you did not seize me." This idea that Jesus has been around this whole time, and he's pointing out the goofiness of what they're doing. He's not once been problematic for them in a violent way, or as if they would need an army to come arrest him, or any of that stuff. He even goes willingly. It's really his disciples that are more upset than he is at first. And then when all of that has taken place, they get Jesus and all his disciples run off. So in verse 57, then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. Going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days." So Jesus is talking to the crowds, and he had said, "Yeah, I'll destroy the temple and raise it in 3 days." Right? Which is very easily misquoted and misunderstood here. But I think it's interesting because because they wanted to get a conviction, they had lots of false witnesses. Lots of false witnesses, right? But it's ultimately God's sovereign plan that Jesus be crucified. And what do? They twist in something that Jesus had said, and they poke at it until it's a charge. So I think it's interesting that even the false testimony that they brought fails. The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so." So again, there's the interesting, that's tied in with Judas. Judas, is it I, Rabbi? You have said so. Pontius Pilate, are you the king of the Jews? You have said so. And here, you have said so. Are you the Christ, the Son of God? You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spit in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" They start beating him on the spot. So pretty interesting. The Son of God comes in and says, "I'm going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days." And based on that, they ask him, "Are you the Son of God? Are you the Christ? You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." So he identifies with the Son of Man. And that's how they got him. You'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. So after all of that, Jesus, I think it's an interesting point here that, well, yeah, we'll get to that. So they start beating him. And then in verse 69, now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you mean." When he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and he said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. So again, even outside the courtyard, when Jesus is being beaten and he's being judged and condemned, Peter's outside and denies Jesus 3 times, utterly forsaking his Lord, his servant, or his master, his rabbi, utterly forsaken. And one thing that I think is crazy, it's mind-blowing to me, the fact, I brought it up in a lot of these videos, Jesus is charged on blasphemy. The Son of God is charged with blasphemy. So Jesus says nothing during his trial. Finally, a witness comes up that says, "Hey, I remember," he said, "he's going to tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days." So clearly he's talking about his own body, the temple, God residing on earth in his body, Son of God, Son of Man, Son of David, God and human, God in the flesh, human, fully God, fully human. They take that and misquote it, they misunderstand it, they don't get the point, and they accuse him of blasphemy based on him telling the truth about being the Son of God. So it's a complete upside down flip here. And then the real irony is that the people twisting Jesus' words are committing blasphemy. So they're accusing Jesus of blasphemy, and because they accuse him of blasphemy, they commit blasphemy. They are trying to condemn and crucify the Son of God for no other reason than saying he's the Son of God. Very interesting. Actually, it betrays the real reason, which is that their invested interests are at stake. seeing all that happen, Peter goes out, and this is, again, one of the examples of Jesus being utterly forsaken. One thing that's interesting, some of the Gospels show the redemption of Peter, or the forgiveness of Peter, or whatever you want to call it. There's this idea, Peter is denied 3 times, and in some of the Gospels, Jesus actually asks him, 3 separate occasions, do you love me? And Peter answers in the affirmative. And so it's like this rebuilding of Peter. That does not happen in Matthew. Matthew, again, really has this flavor of Jesus' forsakenness. And it's with his disciples, Judas betraying him, the disciples fleeing in the garden, and then after he's been condemned, Peter denying him 3 times with, no redeeming story after that in Matthew. So Jesus is alone from this point on, and he only gets more alone, more forsaken by people as it goes on. So that's chapter 26. So we'll pick up in chapter 27. Put down below what you liked about this section. As always, like and subscribe, blah, blah, blah. You probably get that all the time with videos, but it's a good reminder. Anyways, that's all I have. Like I said, we'll pick up with Jesus being delivered to Pilate and what happens with Judas in the next chapter. So, peace.